I've been trying the open beta of the upcoming Korean free-to-play MMO Throne and Liberty, which over there has been out for more than half a year, after being pretty poorly received, competing with the likes of MapleStory and Elsword in the Korean PC Bang charts. Despite that, I actually had quite a bit of fun playing the game up until this point, just from what I was able to see in the beta, so we'll go over that in this video to help you decide whether you want to try this on launch or not. Because it's probably the most important aspect when it comes to games like this, I want to talk about the combat first. In Throne and Liberty, there are no classes. Instead, there are 12 hotbar slots where you can slot abilities however you want. These abilities are attached to weapons, and you can have 2 weapons at a time. For my playthrough, I chose the staff and the wand. Going into the skill menu, we have various options for active abilities that we can then drag down onto our hotbar, and we also have various passive abilities that we can use to change our playstyle a little bit that we also have to slot. Despite these 2 sections down there being split, which makes it look like you have to have 6 wand abilities and 6 staff abilities, you can slot abilities from either weapon on either side. So you could have 10 staff abilities but only 2 wand abilities. When you start combat with an opponent, your character will automatically start auto-attacking. You can then also switch weapons, which will change the auto-attack that you're using. While your character is auto-attacking, you're then also able to use the other abilities. For staff, for example, we have this fireball, for which you have to stand still because it's a cast, and you can use this up to 3 times, and each time you use it, the cast time is going to go down. There's also some synergy between these abilities in the effects that they apply. So for example, I can apply burning stacks using my fire spell, and then I have another fire spell that deals more damage depending on how many of these stacks I have. There's also some cross-weapon synergy because I can get rid of these debuffs using an ability on my wand, which then deals all of the burning damage immediately. When I got started at first, the combat felt very clunky and kind of simplistic to me. But in hindsight, that was down to me only really having 3 or 4 abilities that I was actively using because those were the only ones that made sense in that level range, and they didn't really have much synergy, so it just came down to spamming them whenever they were up. Later on, when I started unlocking more active and passive abilities, everything started to make sense a bit more and I unlocked more synergies. So for example, I unlocked the frost spell as well as the lightning spells, which actually synergize because the lightning spells can deal AoE damage when enemies are frosted, as the game calls it. So very quickly, I had occupied all of the hotbar slots with things that were actually useful to me, with the wand mostly focused on debuffs, and the staff very much focused on dealing most of my damage. When you combine that with the timed defensive parry moves that you have to do, as well as the extra Guardian ability, which you'll unlock later on, as well as the consumables that you have, as well as the fact that you're going to use your Morph Dash, which we'll talk about in a little bit, to move out of a bunch of AoEs on the ground, you do actually have 15-16 active abilities, which is then pretty reasonable. So later on into the game, I would say level 30 and above, I was never really wanting for any additional buttons to press. I think this combat starts off very weak, and then gets quite a bit better, even if I'll definitely say that it's not the best MMO combat I've ever played. Next, I want to talk about the leveling experience, because historically that's where most MMOs lose the majority of their players. And I'm happy to report that overall Throne and Liberty does a really good job here. First off, there's the story. This is really nothing special, it doesn't take many risks, but I don't think anybody expected the Korean free-to-play MMO to shine in that regard. There wasn't a moment where I was falling asleep, but it also didn't have any fantastic moments. Overall, it just exists and it's okay. Where the game does shine is the quest design. From trying to make little sandballs in the desert that, whenever they collide with opponents, disintegrate, to quests that creatively integrate the morph system where you turn into a creature that can either run really fast, glide, or swim, to dealing with a massive sandworm somewhere, to dealing with some demon. There are a bunch of interesting boss fights, a lot of instance content. There's one time where I was running around an orc camp disguised as an orc. There was one time where I was literally an orange. The quest design is something that the game really shines at, even in comparison to some paid MMOs out there. All of the kind of main story content is then also interrupted by decent gameplay encounters. There are the side quests that you can find all throughout the world that are equally creative for the most part, but then you also have something that I absolutely love, and that's the secret dungeons. These are completely optional and they let you face off against a single opponent alone, and if you complete it, you get a hefty reward of growth zones, which you need to upgrade your gear. I found that these were always fairly challenging with the gear and spells that I had, being a player that's still learning the game, and they really forced me to use all of the consumables that I have, learn my spells, and really get the defensive spells down, because if you weren't doing that, there's no chance in hell you would beat these. So overall, a very nice diversion from the rest of the gameplay that felt very rewarding, and I really wish that more MMORPGs used these. On the other hand, you also have 3 leveling dungeons at level 20, 30 and 40 that were also very enjoyable, with the third one having a boss that I would say is kind of difficult for a level 30 boss in a dungeon like this, because it required very good teamwork. There was one mechanic where a player gets marked and they get hit with 3 fireballs that have to be soaked by their teammates. Now, one player can soak 1 fireball, except for the tank who can soak 2. And the other mechanic was one where you had to use these chains on the side of the arena simultaneously with 4 players to douse the boss in water, lest you be killed by a bunch of raid wights hitting you. So all in all, together with a bunch of party finder issues that still existed in the beta that are hopefully going to be fixed in the main game, killing this boss took me about 2 or 3 hours until I had a party that was competent enough to kill this boss with me. However, this one was definitely an outlier and the other dungeons were pretty easy. Outside of that, the game also has various open world events that you can complete with other players, some of which were also pretty enjoyable. One time I teamed up with a bunch of people and we jumped on this giant floating whale that appears occasionally. That was really cool. Another time it's as simple as killing a bunch of goblins for whatever they have and delivering the items. There are also world bosses which you can challenge with other players, and also world bosses in a conflict mode that involves some sort of PvP as well. The game's world itself isn't really that big, although they already have announced a bunch of new zones that they're adding, and I assume as long as this game is running, they're gonna keep adding new stuff. What's there, I think, is very beautifully designed. Outside of a few areas in some of the later zones, namely the orc camps, I enjoyed all of the zones. And one thing I really liked was the verticality in these maps through the grappling hooks as well as the gliding features that you have, just making you think about the landscape you're traversing in ways that other MMOs don't. Now, before we talk about the monetization of the game, I want to talk about the gearing for a moment and just how you upgrade your character in general. Your gear is split into different tiers. You have green, blue, purple, and so on. Inside of these tiers, you can then upgrade your gear using growth stones. So for example, if I have an uncommon item, I can upgrade it up to level 6 using uncommon growth stones. These stones can be earned through various means in game, for example the secret dungeons I mentioned earlier, but also doing some of the side quests, dailies, events, and so on. When you then find an item of a higher tier, meaning from uncommon we would go to rare, which is the blue, we can transfer some of the upgrades that we've made to the other item into our new item. Now, uncommon items can be very easily crafted by using these lithographs, which are recipes. For uncommon items, you just need a general lithograph. So for example, if you want to craft an armor piece, you just need an armor lithograph. However, if you want to craft rare items and above, you'll need a specific lithograph for that specific gear piece. So you can't just go around crafting all of the rare gear without farming that out in the first place. So once you reach the end game, it's going to be very much a matter of trying to figure out which gear pieces you need, farming them either directly through the dungeons, crafting them, finding the crafting materials, doing the various daily contracts for the contract currency that you can then use on growth stones. It's basically just a time-gated gear grind that's going to take you quite a while of logging in and keeping you engaged with the game. The main reason why you'd want to continue improving your gear in the endgame is participating in the PvP and just being able to deal with all of the PvE encounters a little bit easier. I tried getting into some smaller scale PvP during the beta, and for the most part it was pretty enjoyable. We'll see how it turns out with the mass PvP whenever the game comes out. To me, it's just a question of whether this is going to be enough to keep most players interested in the endgame gear grind, or whether they need to keep adding more PvE content, because I can definitely see the appeal of mass PvP and some small-scale event PvP wearing off very quickly. But the PvP that I did try felt pretty fun for the 1 or 2 hours I was engaged with it. And this is the moment where I want to talk about the monetization of the game a little bit now that we understand all of this. So the first two things you'll notice in the store are that there is a level pass as well as a battle pass. The level pass will give you various rewards as you level up, including growth stones, consumables, and so on. This, I would say, is definitely pay to win, but it is not as bad as it sounds in the first place because you can level up just fine without it. It's just an accelerated kind of character progression. You can save yourself a bunch of side quests, which you'll want to do eventually anyways. And it's kind of the same thing for the battle pass. There's a free tier, there's also a paid tier, and the paid players just get more stuff and they get better stuff. Now, on top of this, there is also an auction house in this game that runs on a currency that you can buy using real money. This in-game currency is called Lucent, and it's also the same one that is used in the in-game store. So in the in-game store, you can buy various costumes and also morphs for your characters, turning into different morphed animals basically. But you can also take that to the auction house, and here is where the real pay-to-win whaling will happen. Because remember, all of the gear pieces, all of the lithographs, all that stuff can be put up on the market board and sold for Lucent. So basically, you have gear being sold for real money. Now that in return also means that players who find gear or lithographs that they don't need can put it up on the auction house and receive Lucent in return to buy things that they want, again off the auction house or I assume the in-game store. I did hear that they made the leveling pass as well as the battle pass intentionally a little bit less pay to win for the Western audiences, but in my opinion none of that matters as long as the auction house is a place where you can buy items using real money. In addition to that, you've also now created a world where bots are able to farm lithographs by killing some mobs over and over and putting them up on the market board to then sell for Lucent, which is then used in RMT. Which by the way was already being advertised in the chat during the beta 3 days in. Now obviously all of this is horribly pay to win, but to close off this section I do want to make one last point, and that is a quick comparison to World of Warcraft. A lot of you will know that in World of Warcraft you can buy something called a WoW token which you can sell to other players for gold. So indirectly you can already buy gold using real world money. And that gold can then be spent on boosts which gives you gear. So basically, World of Warcraft is just as pay to win as Throne and Liberty, except Throne and Liberty removes the middleman booster. I just wanted to put that out there. I know a lot of people are gonna be mad about this, but that's how I see it. There is also the matter of the early access editions, which has the community split a little bit. Basically, you can buy early access, which is 5 days, but the early access people are gonna be on special early access servers. So the people starting 5 days later are going to have completely fresh servers unaffected by all of the people who already started 5 days ago. So I think this is going to split communities to a degree, and if you're asking me, I think it would actually be a better idea not to buy the early access edition, because on the early access servers you're going to have a bunch of people who are fine paying the early access premium because they are impatient, who are just going to be infinitely more likely to be whales for the game, spending more money for power progression. So maybe the standard servers that launch 5 days later are going to be the better choice. Now in summary, overall my time with the game has been pretty good. I would say there are some really strong aspects about it. I think the combat can be enjoyable when you get into the later parts, and I think any game can be enjoyable if you play it with a bunch of friends. Also, let's be real here, us MMO players are so starved for anything, most of us are going to give this game a chance either way. What I would recommend to most players who are not 100% sure is just not to get the early access, try the game out, play it for 2 weeks, at which point you have seen most of the fun parts that this game has to offer anyways, and then you can decide whether you want to continue the gear grind, or whether you should just gracefully peace out, having had a fun free-to-play experience like most of Korea has already done. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.